When people think about national power in the modern world, they often imagine finance, technology brands, stock markets, or military headlines. They picture giant banks, famous consumer companies, advanced software, or the market value of trillion-dollar firms. Manufacturing, by contrast, is often treated as something more ordinary, more mechanical, and somehow less decisive than the glamorous sectors that dominate public attention. In many Western conversations, factories belong to an older economic story. They are associated with smokestacks, assembly lines, and labor costs, not with the future of geopolitical power. This is one reason why many people still misunderstand China. They see China as large, active, and commercially important. But they do not always grasp the full scale of what it means for one country to sit at the center of so much of the world's physical production. That misunderstanding matters more than it seems. Manufacturing is not just one sector among many. It is the material foundation on which many other forms of power rest. A country that manufactures at scale does not only produce goods, it develops supply chains, engineering talent, industrial coordination, logistics networks, machine tools, specialized clusters, energy demand, transport infrastructure, and the practical ability to turn plans into physical output. It learns how to make components, not just final products. It acquires knowledge that is embedded not only in patents or laboratories, but in workshops, production lines, industrial districts, subcontracting networks, and tens of thousands of firms that know how to deliver things reliably, repeatedly, and in huge volumes. Once that ecosystem reaches a certain scale, it becomes much more than an export base. It becomes a strategic platform. That is why China's manufacturing power is bigger than most people realize. China is often described in narrow ways. Some people still think of it mainly as a place that assembles cheap goods. Others treat it as an economy trying to move up the value chain, but still dependent on foreign demand or foreign technology. Those descriptions contain fragments of truth, but they miss the larger picture. China is not simply a country with a lot of factories. It is a civilization also say production. China's manufacturing power is not just large in volume, it's This is the hidden logic behind China's rise. The world often notices China most when trade disputes flare up, when Western politicians talk about tariffs, or when companies worry about supply chain dependence. But those debates are really downstream effects of a deeper reality. China matters so much because it has built one of the most extensive manufacturing ecosystems in human history. And once a country reaches that level of productive depth, its influence extends far beyond exports. It begins to shape costs, industrial standards, production timelines, infrastructure demand, technological adaptation, and even the strategic room other countries have to maneuver. That is why China's manufacturing power cannot be understood as a side story. It is one of the central facts of the 21st century. The first reason China's manufacturing power is bigger than many people realize is that its strength lies not only in scale, but in industrial completeness. Many countries can manufacture some things. Well, a few can dominate particular niches. Some are strong in luxury engineering, some in chemicals, some in precision tools, some in automobiles, some in design, and some in raw materials. But China's advantage is broader than that. It does not rest on one flagship industry or one export success. It rests on the sheer range of sectors that are linked inside one national production system. China can produce raw materials, process inputs, manufacture components, assemble finished goods, build transport systems, expand industrial parks, and ship products through a logistics architecture built to support all of it. This breadth matters because the real strength of manufacturing is not just what a country can make in isolation. It is how many stages of production it can connect without depending too heavily on outsiders. That creates a very different type of economic power. A fragmented manufacturing country may be good at final assembly, but weak in core inputs. Another may be good at high-end design, but weak in scaling output. Another may produce strong equipment, but lack the surrounding supplier network needed for speed and flexibility. China's system is powerful because so many of these layers exist together. When firms at tool makers, ports, transport, corridors, warehouses, labor pools, engineering, complementers, and complementary industries, the whole system becomes faster and harder to replace. Production is no longer just about one factory making one thing. It becomes an ecosystem in which entire industrial chains reinforce one another. This is where many outside observers still look too narrowly. They often focus on headline companies, export statistics, or visible end products. But the deeper power of manufacturing lives in the middle layers. It lives in industrial clustering, in supplier density, in production flexibility, in the ability to move from prototype to scale, in the presence of subcontractors who can adjust quickly, and in the fact that one production zone can pull support from another with extraordinary speed. This is not glamorous from a media perspective, but it is strategically immense. A country with industrial completeness has options. It can shift output, absorb disruptions, localize more stages of production, and reduce vulnerability over time. A country without that completeness may look advanced on paper, yet remain exposed beneath the surface. That is the first lesson. China's manufacturing power is not just that it produces a lot. It is that it produces across a vast spectrum of industries with unusual internal connectivity. That connectivity gives China more than volume. It gives China industrial resilience, scaling power, and the ability to translate manufacturing into national leverage. This is why many attempts to replace China sound easier in speeches than they are in practice. Replacing one factory is possible. Replacing an entire industrial ecology is another matter entirely, and that is where the real magnitude begins to appear. The second reason China's manufacturing power is bigger than most people realize is that manufacturing is not only about economics. It is also about time, speed, and strategic endurance. A country that can manufacture at scale possesses more than productive capacity. It possesses mobilization capacity. It can build infrastructure faster, expand faster, support new technologies faster, and recover from disruptive effects than countries that must raise well. In an era shaped by sanctions, export controls, shipping risk, technological competition, and geopolitical uncertainty, this matters enormously. The ability to make things is also the ability to adapt. It is the ability to reroute, substitute, scale up, and keep functioning under pressure. That is one reason manufacturing has returned to the center of strategic thinking, even in countries that once claimed to have moved beyond it. China understands this deeply. Over the past decades, it did not treat manufacturing simply as a temporary stage on the road to a service economy. It treated industrial development as the backbone of national power. That did not mean avoiding services or technology. It meant building them on top of a huge material base rather than in place of one. The result is that China's manufacturing capacity now supports far more than exports. It supports urbanization, transport expansion, grid development, energy equipment deployment, military industrial depth, technological scaling, and the internal market's ability to absorb and reproduce productive capacity. In other words, Chinese manufacturing is not standing outside the rest of the economy. It is woven through it. This is why people who look only at consumption or finance often misread the balance. A nation can appear richer in asset values, more sophisticated in capital markets, or stronger in global branding, while still discovering that another country has built deeper command over physical production. And in periods of stability, that difference may seem manageable. But in periods of strategic tension, the hidden hierarchy becomes clearer. Who can build more ships? Who can expand battery output faster? Who can produce components at lower cost and in larger volume? Who can construct rail, ports, industrial parks, and grid infrastructure with greater speed? Who can scale a strategic industry without waiting years for supply chains to be rebuilt? These are not secondary questions. They shape how much room a country has under pressure is the second less Indo foreign matters because it compresses time. It allows the country to do in years or sometimes months what more fragmented systems may struggle to do in far long periods. That does not mean China is unbeatable, nor does it mean it has no weaknesses. But it does mean that manufacturing power is not just about output totals. It is about strategic tempo. A country that can build quickly, coordinate broadly, and scale production across linked sectors gains an advantage that many traditional economic indicators fail to capture. And that advantage becomes even more important when competition hardens. The third and deepest reason China's manufacturing power is bigger than most people realize is that it changes the structure of global dependence. In earlier periods of globalization, many advanced economies assumed they could outsource production without losing real control. They believed design, finance, innovation, branding, and high-end coordination would remain the true commanding heights, while manufacturing could be distributed around the world according to cost. Under that model, the location of factories mattered, but not decisively. Production was seen as flexible, transferable, and ultimately subordinate to the countries that still controlled capital, technology, and markets. For a while, this seemed plausible. But China's rise has challenged that assumption. It has shown that if one country becomes central enough to the world's manufacturing architecture, production itself becomes a source of strategic influence. That is what many people are now slowly beginning to grasp. When one country becomes deeply embedded in supply chains for machinery, electronics, industrial inputs, green technologies, consumer goods, transport equipment, and countless intermediate products, then dependence no longer flows in just one direction. The world may buy, invest, design, and innovate across many countries, but it also has to source, assemble, process, and deliver through the industrial systems that actually make modern life possible. This gives manufacturing heavy power a different kind of weight. It may not always look as elegant as financial dominance, but it creates leverage through necessity. Others may not notice it fully until disruption occurs, until prices spike, shipments stall, projects slow, or strategic industries suddenly discover how much of their material base lies elsewhere. This is the deeper meaning of China's manufacturing rise. China is not simply making more goods. It is occupying more strategic space inside the world economy. It influences how cheap things can be, how fast industries can scale, where firms invest, how supply chains are organized, and how difficult it is for rivals to de-risk without paying enormous economic costs. That does not mean China controls the world, and it does not mean every country is helpless. But it does mean that global power can no longer be understood only through military alliances, financial markets, or technology headlines. It must also be understood through industrial centrality. And by that measure, China's role is larger, deeper, and more consequential than many people still admit. History teaches the same lesson again and again. Powers that dominate production often shape more than economics. They shape the practical possibilities available to others. They influence the speed of development, the cost of transformation, the resilience of infrastructure, and the strategic choices of states that depend on material systems they do not fully control. That is why China's manufacturing strength is not just a business story. It is a world order story. It is about what happens when one country becomes so deeply integrated into the making of the modern world that competition with it is no longer merely commercial, but structural. That is why this story matters. If you want to understand China's real place in the global system, do not just look at export totals or the label on the final product. Look at the supply chains behind it, the industrial clusters supporting it, the ports moving it, the components inside it, the machines building it, and the scale that allows the whole system to keep expanding. Because that is where the real story begins. And if this is the kind of breakdown you want, not just what countries sell, but how production becomes power and how industrial systems reshape the balance of the world, then stay with this channel. We are not just following trade. We are mapping the structures that make modern power possible.